Okay, we're ready for the first session today, which will be on education and research. My name is Sunniva Whittaker, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of Agder. This session will be in English. The three participants are all German, two of them representing Norway. Unfortunately, yes, I see the program has been corrected. So I would like to invite Rector Frank Reichert, State Secretary Rebecca Bosch, and President Stefan Herzig from the Technische Hochschule in Cologne to the podium. Free seating, yes. There we go. Excellent. Yes, first of all, welcome. I thought maybe I would first let you say a few words about yourself and your background.
Okay. Thank you very much. I feel very much does this work? Yeah. I feel very honored to be here in this place. It's not my first time, but almost the first time in Kristiansand. I spent a little time of my life, actually half of my life, in the city of Kiel, which is not too far from here. And then science and career threw me into the Rhine area, which speaks a totally different mentality than anything that is surrounding the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. I'm by training a medical doctor, but moved into theoretical discipline, pharmacology, in order to understand that teaching our students is not only interesting and important, but to the very end of vital interest of their former later patients. So I did a lot of teaching, and by that I went into teaching management, first at the University of Cologne, and now as the president or rector, or as you may call it, at the Technische Hochschule or University of Applied Science, Cologne. 3 words about my institution. The University of Cologne and the Technische Hochschule Cologne are each among the largest, or the actual largest, representatives of the 2 main types of higher education institutions in Germany, namely universities and University of Applied Science. Together we have some 75,000 students in our 2 institutions, and together with almost 20 further higher education institutions, the city of Cologne has a total of 100,000 students. The disciplines that we harbor at the Technical University or Technische Hochschule Köln are somewhat complementary to the spectrum of the university, which has the classical medicine, law, business, natural science and philosophical science and human science. So we are all branches of engineering traditionally, but also all disciplines that in the late 1960s and early 1970s were formed from the traditional vocational college type education to true tertiary education, such as library science, translational science, cultural science such as conservation science, design, social work and its science and so on. And we have a stronghold in informatics, more recently of very much importance, and also of applied natural science.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, Rebecca Bosch, we know you as State Secretary, but obviously you have also been through a higher education. Maybe you could say a few words about your educational background?
Oh, well, yes, I can do that. Well, actually, I'm not a German technically anymore.
No.
I applied for the Norwegian passport in 2011, and then I had to give up the German. Right. Now that the government has made it possible to apply for 2 passports, but I'm only Norwegian, at least on paper. So just to, I don't know about Frank, but... Well, my background is... I started as a journalist. I also studied that, and then in Germany, quite often you work in a newspaper and you go to journalist school parallel. So that was where I started. worked as a journalist in a newspaper in the near of Cologne, north of Cologne, in Dortmund and Hagen. And then I started studies at the Freie University in Berlin, besides job, 4 years. And then I moved to Norway, and my parents were just like, oh dear, all this education, then she just moves to another country, started scratch. Well,
didn't work out too badly. Yes, and Frank, we know you mostly as the rector of the university, but maybe you could say a few words about your educational background.
Yeah, so I mean, I started some 62 years ago in Germany. That's a long time ago. And at least it feels like that sometimes. Then I studied in Aachen University, became an engineer and then a PhD. And then, because I was in a wonderful European project, I went to Sweden, because Sweden was the country where you could work on mobile communications. So in 91 I went to Sweden. And then, of course, I had different type of positions, and for example, also working on mobile internet. So there was a time when there was no camera in the phone, so I was working on camera in phones for Ericsson. And then there came this wonderful position in Agder region, and I always wanted to be a professor because that meant I can do whatever I want. that was my vision of a professor. And I applied for it, and fortunately I got it. I'm not sure I would get it today, because now I am director. But at that time I was really at the top of my activity. And it was about mobile internet, of course, because we were also a University of Applied Science, and we want to be a university, and we needed someone with my profile. So that's how it all started, and I had the freedom of a professor and could do what I want for 2 years. And then I became the dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Science, and 8.5 years later I became director. And that's the story of my life, I guess. Yes. And then and I still have a German passport, but I like the idea to have 2 passports, obviously. And I've written, I was actually on the embassy homepage, and it's not law yet.
No, it takes 1 year to enter into, well, operational phase. But the timing is wonderful. So.
Right, so we're all here because the Willy Brandt Foundation works to enhance the relationship between Norway and Germany. And Rebecca, you mentioned a lot about why it's important for Norway to collaborate with Germany. You probably didn't understand what she said, but it would be interesting to get the German perspective. We know that for Norway, Germany is the largest trade partner. But for Germany, why is it interesting to collaborate with a small country such as Norway?
Well, I mean, as you already mentioned, I think, Norway is quite up front among the countries where our students like to go. And I'm not sure of the reason. It's certainly a pleasant country. It is an interesting country. It stands for high-end technology, high living standard, and also, I would say, a visionary aspect of many things. My son actually studies engineering in the specialization of renewable energy. And last night when we were talking, I'm going to Norway, he said, these Norwegians are so amazing. They have more than 100% supply of renewable energy in their system, and yet they are exporting all the oil to all of us. So they are really doing it the right way. And maybe this is this feeling, besides, the strong historical ties between Germany and the Scandinavian countries that are deeply embedded in culture. So 2 years ago, I visited with a delegation the other 3 Scandinavian countries here, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, and visited many universities there. And all people were complaining about the fact that the abundance of German language in teacher education, for instance, and in programs and so was vanishing, because there's a feeling of connectedness, of some deep cultural kind. What is important about collaboration, I think, and the recent call initiated by Emmanuel Macron on European university signifies what it is all about. We need, to join forces more systematically and more deeply. Erasmus and Erasmus Plus has over more than 30 years done a wonderful and great and broadly acting job on making students mobile, primarily students mobile, also staff, also professors, but it's the more than 4 million young people that have carried the wave of being together. And this is wonderful, this is important also for the labor market, but it is not enough to strengthen the institutional ties. We are currently, as an institution, looking for partners who are willing, together with us, to go multi-dimensional in a joint way. Partner institutions that embrace several disciplines. So student exchange is not just a matter of architecture, but also of mechanical engineering and also language, let's say. Multidimensional in the target groups that are part of the story, so not just students, also scientists, also non-academic staff, and multidimensional also in the, let's say, aims of the activity. Of course, teaching and learning, of course, research, but more and more importantly, and this is also what the new programs in Europe are about, translational activities, innovation, collaboration with partners outside the academic institutions. So the famous third mission issue has to be on the table if we discuss strengthening our connections, because these are the things that really create polyvalent connections between institutions that make them more long-lasting and more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
just let me add, of course, the ties between Norway and Germany, they have been strong way back in time, and it's a lot about culture and the language, that is the same language group. And just one example, when Ålesund burned down, what was it, 130 years back in time, the German Kaiser Wilhelm was amongst those that made it, build it up again. Mm-hmm. Because he and a lot of other people high up on the scale, they visited Norway, regularly had their holiday up here. Germans have a very romantic picture of Norway in general. Mm-hmm. And it's really amongst the most popular countries to travel for a certain group of Germans, age-wise and also income-wise, because it's quite expensive. So it is very popular, and then you have this concrete stuff. Like I worked in the environment agency in Norway for 8 years, and wherever I went into research institutes or other public bodies that worked on environmental stuff or energy, you find Germans all over the place that are hired, that studied in Norway maybe a year or two, and then they stayed up here, found a partner, and then they were hired in public bodies in Norway, or also everything that has to do with energy, technology, environmental climate stuff. Lots of Germans. So Norway has always been, in the modern time at least, also a market where Germans of all kinds, whether they are dentists or medicines or people working in healthcare or handicrafts, or also people that study certain kind of scientific specializations in environment, they find jobs in Norway, and quite often it's well paid. It's at least the reputation is that it's more cozy, more cozy work time, not this strong. Not all of this, of course, is reality, but still Germans find Norway quite attractive also work-wise. So the ties are really, it's on both sides that there is a genuine interest of collaboration.
Yeah. You mentioned this new EU initiative of European universities, and I'd like to ask you, Frank, whether you have considered for UIA to enter into this type of collaboration. I know that the University of Oslo has applied, and I believe the University of Southeast Norway as well.
Yes.
So has this ever been on the table?
So the idea that universities join forces and create high-quality programs, that's of course a very convincing idea. And it is also increasingly difficult to have all the competences at one university, especially in the technology area, to really sustain the quality that we have today. In addition to that is also we have the UN Sustainability Goal number 4, that there should be high quality education as affordable and accessible for everyone. So everything points in the same direction, so we have to work together, we have to open up our education and share the type of setups that we have for teaching certain subjects, and basically not only one university working alone on a certain topic, but you have actually a consortium of universities who share everything in a certain area in order to give our students the best possible education, but also, of course, building a bridge between our researchers and scientists, because that will build also a bridge between the different environments. So you know that I will be a professor soon, and I really want to work on that in the future, because I believe in it, and I think it's the only way forward, actually. There are lots of rules and complicated laws, which will make it difficult for us, but I've always found if there's a will, people find a solution. So my hope is really that we will contribute, not only also for European universities as a whole having a consortium, but inviting also other universities, let's say from Tanzania, into the consortium, because they have wonderful people, but they don't have the same type of infrastructure that we have.
Yeah, you talked about rules and regulations, because this brings me to my next question, which is, you've talked a lot about the possibilities and the opportunities, but what are the main challenges in the when it comes to collaboration between our two countries?
Well, I would put it like that there's a threshold for a lot of young people to get into the German system, let's say. It starts at school, where not enough pupils choose German as a second foreign language. We have also a problem that there's not enough German teachers in place, and those that are there are rather old, so we are struggling to replace them, because there's not enough students taking German as a whole degree. But apart from that, I think for a lot of Norwegian students it's important to know that there would be courses in English. And I know that there is a tendency that also German universities in higher degree would offer that, but that's maybe not as well known. So Norwegian students the big masses, tend to choose countries that are native English speaking. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Great Britain, US, of course. So that's something that we really would like to work on, and it has been worked on for many years, but it's not that easy. France also is a country of high interest and high importance for Norway, but the numbers are as low or even lower than the Germans, German students and pupils. So we really have to focus on it, and we have some measures in place. I told it in Norwegian, but we see that there is an effect, but the effect is not high enough yet. So we really have to continue to work on that over a long time period, I would say. And also to really increase the possibilities for pupils and students to make more conscious choices. That's also an impression I have after 15 months in that role. I have talked to several students and also pupils in Norway. What makes them choose a language above another, or what makes them choose a second language and really focus on it. And quite often there is no conscious choice behind it. It's just by chance. So I think we have to start earlier. We have to... A language as a dimension in school has to be lifted a bit. And also the importance of language in a time where everybody has Google Translator. So maybe we have to redefine why foreign languages are important and what they do to you as a person. What a Google Translator can't do. So I think there's a different path we have to work on. We have to start earlier. We have to be more persuasive. And we have to also offer extra courses to students that maybe don't feel they are quite good enough in German, but they want to study in Germany, that they can get extra courses, and then it's easier for them to get the first step done. And I know that our German partners, they're quite eager to receive more Norwegian students, so that is not the problem. The problem is on our side of the border.
Yes. Well, I know that Holland has a policy of offering most of its higher education in English. Is there a similar trend? I know it's not as strong in Germany, but is there a similar trend that there is a great wish to attract international students to Germany?
Definitely yes, in one way. it has been hampered in the last decade to some extent. This is due to the simple fact that first we had the omission of military service in 2011, and then one region after the other went from 9-year high school education to 8 years, so we had double cohorts all over the nation. This now rolls back by time. So we had a high incoming new student load over the last decade that was politically supported by a lot of money, but it meant that most of the programs in universities and University of Applied Science had to close the number of admissions. And with that, in Germany, there goes a law that as you limit the number of admissions, there's a quorum on international students that may enter. So whenever access is free, international student numbers go up. Whenever access is restricted, it goes down. And of course, we also have the debate of charging non-EU students with tuition fees. This is also a migrating phenomenon. Now it's in the southwest. North Rhine-Westphalia considers this, maybe abandons it. This is another factor that at least for a while can reduce international student parts of the story. In general, there is a tendency to internationalize the programs. Yes. Much less expressed than in the Netherlands, but at least in the university that I know, there's increasing trend to partially or fully offer at least the master programs in English. This is all not only to attract foreign students, this is also in realizing that with all the means that we have to support student mobility, experts nowadays agree that you can only do so and so much. The proportion of our German students that want and in fact then really go abroad is increasing, has increased over the last decades, but it seems to saturate at a level that highly depends on the disciplines. So in the arts, in the human science, high degree of internationalization. Medicine, quite okay. Law, for natural and good reasons, very low. They more work with double degree and multinational programs. Teacher education, a real mess, hardly any mobility. And engineering science and natural science is also not good. So we can try fostering this for years and decades further, but there will be a still majority of students who want to stay home. And for these students, we rapidly need to provide them with the intercultural and international competencies that they need in their immediate working environment. So this includes language proficiency, multilingual courses, but this also encounters bringing them together with international students in this setting, with where they are. We call all this internationalization at home. This is not a contradiction to mobility, it's a complement, if you want, and we have to strongly work on that.
But we are actually also looking into this internationalization at home, where we enable students that will not go abroad to anyway get some of the competencies that we want them to have. But what I wanted just to add was this aspect of tuition fees, which is a really interesting one, since both Norway and Germany are amongst the rather few countries that still stick to this higher education should be for free, and everybody should have the chance to get an higher education. I really think, as a politician, this is an important value that we have to stick to and to keep. But one side effect that a lot of countries have started to take tuition fees is that they also more strategically buy in students from other countries and attract them with professional marketing and so on. And that is something that both Germany and Norway do not do in the same way, which indeed has occurred to become a slight problem, because there's also some, well, what could you say, competition for good heads and smart students. And some of those countries that are most aggressively buying in students from other countries, bringing them to their universities, which then earn a lot of money on educating a lot of foreign students, is a completely different model than what we want to have. And still we also have to realize that there's also sort of competition, and that we maybe have to work on how we attract other students, still not giving up the free higher education principle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox, because my impression is that many people perceive that if something is free, it can't be very good.
Really.
Yeah.
So the fact that an education is expensive is sort of a token of its high quality. But you touched upon one thing that was quite interesting. You mentioned the fact that you talked about the Länder, that there were differences between the different Länder.
Yeah.
And I found that a bit challenging in contacting, let's say, support agencies in Germany. For instance, in Norway we have DQ that covers the whole country. In France you have Campus France. And when I called the Norwegian embassy in Berlin, they said, well, there's a slight problem here. You have to approach the various Länder. Do you think that could be an impediment to more collaboration for universities who do not already have contact with specific universities?
I mean, this federal system of education is increasingly seen as a hurdle for sufficient development in many, many aspects. With regard to international collaboration, I would think it is not as much of a problem, because here we are obeying, let's say, European rules or international rules in what we do. So in terms of Erasmus funding, in terms of DAAD, our international exchange agency in Germany, the rules are pretty much the same all over Germany. So the tricky details are much more in the grassroots of everyday organization of how the programs are run. Eventually we will get into this. If we really, for instance, want to be European universities, we have to tackle the issue of the different terms, positions over the calendar. And this is also, in Germany, then an issue of slightly different dates set for each region. But the big challenge will be to have these tremendously different calendar schemes across Europe harmonized, despite the meteorological differences and the good traditional reasons for handling it in the way it does. No, with respect to internationalization, I have very little problem with the federal system.
It's quite often that it's on institutional level, that one university reaches out to another one and then they might agree on some formal collaboration. So the federal system is, as much as I know, quite often not involved at all. So it shouldn't be a hurdle. But of course, it can look from outside, it can look a bit confusing. So the best thing is just to dig right down to the institutional level, I think.
Let's put it that way. If we, as Germany, wanted to have a situation where we say, okay, we understand this with the calendar, we want to start on September 1st and we want to end on whatever, May 30th or whatever. That would take a consensus between 16 regions plus the national government. And this tends to be a hard task to reach such a high degree of consensus. It eventually happens here and there. Usually if somebody gives money into the system, then people are happy with whatever they have to apply to agree to. But in critical issues, it's difficult.
Frank, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, cooperation is of course something that we want, but for some studies it would be difficult to move over to English. I think about nursing education and teacher education, because that's really important to have the local language. On the far end you have of course the engineering and economic studies, and all the students are used to having English textbooks and they are writing their thesis in English. For them it doesn't really matter to speak English. And then you have some studies in the middle, let's say philosophy, because you when you talk, and we discussed it earlier, when you're in a certain language, you use a certain terminology, and then it's difficult to move to a different language. That's just the field, and also maybe the culture in that field that makes it difficult to move to a different language. So that's one hurdle. No? So we need to be a little bit more specific which area we are talking about. And the other thing is, I think, is a big problem is teaching methods, honestly. If it's a lecture-based type of culture in a certain study, then it's very difficult to cooperate between the different universities because you would have to move the teacher, so to speak. Yeah. But if it's using more and more digital modules, maybe it would be easier, or it's using new types of problem-oriented or active learning type of setups, then I think it's easier to cooperate because these are methods which are very easy to do in a shared manner. Mm-hmm. So depending what culture a certain study program has, it will be difficult to cooperate, even if it would be language compatible, but the teaching methods may be different and the culture may be different. But I'm pretty sure in engineering or like economics, it's very easy actually to do. But still there we would need to think very carefully what's the way we are actually building up our programs from the pedagogic point of view.
Rebecca, you mentioned a few areas where there was a potential for collaboration. You mentioned energy, the environment, what was the third one? Climate
and polar research.
Polar research, yes. But would you say that there's a potential for more collaboration within the social sciences and the human sciences? None of you have mentioned that specifically.
Yeah. Well, yes, the humanities in general, I would say, of course, there is a potential, and I think it also would be good. I mean, I can't speak, of course, on behalf of the German university landscape, but I think when I look at the humanities in Norway, it definitely would be good to look at internationalization as an aspect also there, and to also interconnect them better with technology. And then if you add internationalization, I think that would be good for all parts. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead, Stefan.
As German universities of applied science, many of us at least, we have dealt a lot with the term social innovation. And in a broader sense, so as my institution understands it, social innovation stands for what really good applied science should be, namely evolving new concepts that may be at the beginning technological or digital or whatever to challenge aspects of climate change or whatever you like, but from the very beginning to co-shape the economical and the social aspects of whatever change those technologically based innovations can generate. That's I think this is also understood nowadays in Brussels, that if you want to tackle climate change, you have to not just look for solar energy devices or whatever, but you have to co-develop the way you socially integrate those new technologies in the whole system. And therefore, it will be very important not to just cross the borders among the three pillars that the EU usually separates with education and research and transfer and innovation, but also to integrate the disciplines much more. But this is how I see the new concept of the next funding period of Horizon Europe, next generation after Horizon 2020, that they understand we have to do this together, discipline-wise and pillar-wise. Hope they will be able to administer it appropriately.
Yeah, Frank?
So Norway has a program for centers of excellence in education, but I don't remember whether international network is actually a criteria in that context. And I'm also very unsure, because the funds, they are large, but they are distributed over 10 years. And I'm not even sure that it's possible actually to fund, for example, a German partner in that context. From the research centers of excellence, I know it's possible, because you argue, I need this competence. And so, for example, Aachen University has got 2 PhDs paid by Norway because they're important for the industry here. But how do we argue in an education context? And so that may be also a possibility, actually, to, if we want to have a European mind, to think maybe the centers of excellence, the next generation, could actually be international centers of excellence, trying actually to pull from the competence from different countries. And I'm pretty sure also Germany would be probably interested to partner up with that. I had to say this because Rebecca is sitting here.
No pressure.
But if you want international participation, we need also incentives and financial platforms to make that. That helps at least. No?
Yes. Oh, well, we have 3 people here of, let's say, at least German descent, since you have become a Norwegian citizen. And you all speak good English, so that's something I think many Norwegian students, or maybe their parents would say when they were choosing foreign languages at school, say, well, you don't need to learn German because the Germans speak English. So what is your take on that?
Well, first, that's not quite true for the entire Germany, I would say. Firstly, my parents' generation, the amount of people speaking English fluently is rather low. My father, for instance, he learned Latin and the old Greek stuff and some Hebraic and stuff, so nothing you really can use in everyday life. But then you have also the division between the old Western Germany and Eastern Germany, which also is part of that. Germany is not like Norway, everybody speaks English fluently. And then most of the series you see on TV and the cinema movies and everything is dubbed to German. And all this contributes to English being, well, yes, of course you can survive with only English in Germany, but it depends a bit where you are and who you talk to. But then, of course, there's also this German and Norwegian have their own value. And even if everybody in the room speaks English, it's something completely different if we also can switch over to German or to Norwegian. So I'm not amongst those that really think, well, we can all get around with only one language in the world. That should not happen, and I don't think it is going to happen either. So yes, English is basic and is very, very important, but in my opinion, a second language also is very important, also because of the cultural competences that you receive when you dig into just another language.
You agree?
Also, I wouldn't survive here without speaking Norwegian. I mean, obviously it's very important to learn Norwegian as fast as you can. Also, if you want to live in Norway, so English is very useful, but it's not the language I use on a day-to-day basis when talking to my colleagues or reading the newspaper or reading books, which are only existing in Norwegian, for example. So the local language is super important.
Yes.
I mean, we have currently in Germany a big discussion about Europe and the European administration, and the European elections are coming up in 3 weeks now. Everybody is very active and nervous about this, and this, among other things, and the Brexit and so, helps to bring up the issue of European values. I mean, Macron has done it quite clearly almost 2 years ago. So what are European values? What is the stronghold that makes us believe that our continent is of any more than numerical value 20 years from now? My belief in this regard, it's not only the tradition and the history, but also the coexistence of diversity in many, many aspects. Cultural, ethnic, religious, whatever, among other things, linguistic diversity is a strong value in a world where certainly other languages, in the long run, not English, will dominate. So we have to do everything possible, also together with, let's say, East European countries, to preserve this endangered species of language diversity, which means that, of course, within Europe, we should not have just one, perhaps not even just two, maybe more, 3, 4 very important languages that our European students engaged upon, at least 2 foreign languages. And so, but in addition to that, also all the languages that are spoken on our continent should be preserved and connected to those main languages in a manner that helps us discuss in the depth every language uniquely provides.
Well, I think German has the reputation of being a bit difficult, which might explain why Norwegian pupils do not choose German, but they have this impression that Spanish, for instance, is much easier.
I'm really happy that you bring up that
Yes.
point, because I talked to Sverre from the parliament. He's also the leader of the Willy Brandt Foundation here in Norway, but we both discussed it, because he is a Norwegian that had German in school. And here he comes, Sverre, I'm talking about the problem with how German is taught in Norway. And of course the two of us, we don't have no statistics, but we really agreed on the problem as such. Pupils have to study a lot of grammar, obviously, or at least they had to do that 10, 15, 20 years ago. Lots of grammar. All Norwegians that get to know that I'm a former German, they start to talk to me about the prepositions that they had to learn. Auf, über, unter, zwischen, und so weiter, und so weiter. And I just, what? So my impression is, totally, of course, no statistics, just my feeling, there's too much emphasis on the grammar and too little emphasis on the pleasure of learning new words, making yourself understood, having the pleasure of finding rare words, weird words, funny words. I think we have to focus more on that and forget about the grammar, because Germans in general are really happy if anybody wants to try their language, to express themselves in German. Might be slightly different in France, but I would say that the German grammar is maybe the biggest hurdle in the Norwegian education of pupils in German. Pupils should learn more words. Thank you.
Yes. Well, I had a talk with a colleague just before I came, and automatically he started with "Dus für gegen wieder und and we both thought that this was the main takeaway we had from our German classes when we were at school. So that's quite interesting. But there is this perception of German being a bit difficult. But what about Norwegian? How is Norwegian perceived as a language in Germany? Obviously, it's not very interesting for many Germans to learn Norwegian, but is it considered to be difficult or easy? When you look at how quickly Germans tend to pick up the language, we would tend to believe that it is considered easy.
Germans do have this huge advantage that the grammar basically is the same, but it's an easier version.
Yes.
So if you take away 30% of the grammar, you have the Norwegian grammar.
Right. So it's sort of baby German.
It's a baby, yeah, well, I wouldn't put it like that, but it's an easy German. But then the real problem for Germans learning Norwegian is to speak it correctly. And that's really a tough one. While Norwegians, when they learn just some German, the little they can say sounds perfectly correct. It's really true. And that has something to do with the intonation and the musicality in the Norwegian language. And I have read in some book about European languages that Norwegian is amongst those that, in Europe at least, the most advanced when it comes to where to put the pressure, the intonation, and the musicality, the melody in the language, which really makes a huge difference. Which also makes Germans who are grown up with a rather flat language melody, you really have to work hard to get that working. So after 16 years in Norway, my German friends always make fun of me because my German has started to swing.
Yes.
Don't get rid of the melody anymore.
Yes. Yeah. A couple of different regions were mentioned here. The ambassador comes from Bayern. You mentioned that you come from Kiel, and
South Baden-Württemberg.
From the southern part, and I know that you've spent time in Berlin, but you're
No, I am from Sauerland in Nordrhein-Westfalen. That's just in the near where he owns the university. Yeah.
Yes. So we were talking about not only language differences, but cultural differences. But I do get the impression from what you said about how the university calendar is different and so on, that it is difficult to talk about perhaps one German culture, that there are many different cultures. Could you say a few words about what the differences are? Because these are things that Norwegian students probably should be aware of as well.
I really feel that the ambassador should be on the scene right now, because Bayern is maybe the most annoying part of Germany, because they don't really want to be part of it. They are a Freistaat, and then they speak a totally different language, which is really difficult to understand. And then, not that is enough, they are the kind of Germany that everybody outside Germany thinks of when they think of Germany. So it's a bit irritating, but that also is, I'm just, of course, not totally serious here, but the thing is, Germany is really very diverse. And after I moved to Norway, I also found out that Norway has been much more clever in preserving the dialects. I mean, even if we have Bayern and we have Saxon, we have some of the strong regional dialects still alive. But what Germany has not been good in is really taking care of and preserving the small local dialects. A lot of them have died out. My grandmother, she only spoke dialects. She spoke no High German at all. And that kind of dialect is almost gone now. While in Norway, people have been really good in preserving that and taking care of it. And I think that's really important. I didn't think of that when I was 18. But today I would say this is really a huge value. So yes, Germany is very diverse. There's a lot of different kinds of Germany. But of course, there's a lot that also unites the different parts of the country. Definitely.
Right. Do you have any thoughts on the subject?
Only autobiographical thoughts. When I came back from the United States to the northern part of Germany, that appeared quite strange to me. Quite strange to me. And briefly thereafter, I moved to the Rhine area, and that was, to my feeling, regarding mentality, much closer to East Coast American lifestyle than my experience of northern Germany, which is, I think, I have not so many connections to Norway, but I have connections to Danish people who are living in the deep of North Germany quite a bit. And I think the mentality of Scandinavians and North Germans is much closer than the mentality to some other German regions. Which is good.
Frank, you've lived here for quite a while, so...
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of common values, also tillit, trust. That's really important. If you shake hands on a thing, you better not break your promise. No? So that's very German and it's very Norwegian, I felt. No? And then, of course, we love cross-country skiing in Germany, but we are struggling. We're not as good. Norway always taking home the gold medals, but there are some who are winning slowly, no? So it's getting more and more tough. But it's still a long way to go. But being out in the country, enjoying nature, that's the same thing. No? Then we don't talk about soccer, maybe. But when it comes to cross-country skiing, it's really amazing how it's basically a common hobby of both countries also. There's one advantage, of course, when you're in Norway. If you go through a forest, you will not meet any other person. You can just go straight. The forest will never end. No? And then some you end up at the North Pole. But in Germany, after 500 meters, there's a whole family coming towards you. You will never be alone in the forest, basically. So that's a big advantage here, that you can really enjoy nature.
Okay, well, back to education. I heard the former Minister of Education, Torbjørn Røe Isaksen, at one of the internationalization conferences mentioned that earlier Norwegian students left Norway to study because we didn't have any education here or any study programs, for instance, in engineering and so on. And you mentioned this drop in the number of students, and actually that ANSA, which we now consider to be the sort of defending the right to study abroad, initially was organized to demand that Norway also have study programs so people didn't have to go abroad to study. So there's been quite a shift. So before it was internationalization by obligation, and now we're sort of trying to shove students out, even though they do have an alternative in Norway. But you mentioned this drop in students. Do you think that has anything to do with it? That before students were basically forced to go abroad to get the education they needed, whereas today there are good alternatives here?
Well, I think there's several reasons. It's not only one reason. It's rather complex, and students might have very different reasons why they stay at home as well. One thing is, of course, that we have created a well-functioning, quite broad range of studies up here. Students have it quite comfortable in Norway as well. I mean, they have the funding and they have their friends. They have, quite often it's at campuses that are not too big, which might be a bit frightening. I mean, 100,000 students, one place. That's bigger than the 3 biggest universities put together here in Norway. So there's some difficulties with that. And then, of course, I think it is a question about language, because the numbers going to English-speaking countries has been rising for a lot of time. So that's maybe the most practicable solution for lots of students. But then I think it has a bit to do also with how France, Germany, other countries maybe are promoted. I mean, promoted is the wrong word, but what kind of contact and ideas students get of other countries early in their life. Because the decision to learn French or German or another second language is taken quite early. And I think that lays the foundation whether you are interested in studying abroad later or not, or if you're a bit hesitant. And then students work a lot, it's a group dynamic. If you have two friends that choose German in your class and they're your friends, you might rather also choose German. It's that simple. So there's different reasons, but that there has been a drop over a long period, I think is a bit that other languages like Spain, which has had a really rise in Norway the past 25, 30 years, that is a lot connected to a lot of Norwegians going to Spain in holiday. It's one important reason. And then you have Chinese, maybe for the toughest ones, but that has also become a language more pupils are interested in. There has been a diversification also what the schools offer. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, there was only German. You had English and then you had German. Some schools had French. Now you have a bigger variety of languages. That also is one reason why the amount of pupils going to Germany has been falling for a longer time.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
I mean, in order to get the students to get to know each other, I wonder, I mean, of course, you can do something from the top, but you have been also yourself very active with the student unions, yeah? So if groups of students from, let's say, Agder University would visit a group of students at Köln, and then, of course, there would be an interesting program around that, the university sponsoring the trip, I think there would be actually a certain interest. And we know that because we have had students from Minnesota University coming over regularly every 2 years to learn about renewable energy. And then actually many returned as exchange students. No? So maybe we need to enable some initiatives by our students to actually create contacts between them, and then they get to know each other, and then it's much, much easier, for example, to ask for an exchange visit later on.
I have some ugly speculation about the true motivations of most of the students to go abroad versus the true motivations of us and of employers to send them abroad. This is totally different things. I think, and there's also data on this, that most of the students that go abroad look for cool places in the first sense, which is okay. Whereas students that pick their location more close to at home look for convenience. These are strong drivers of those decision processes. And I mean, if we talk with employers, this is not quite what they want. They don't necessarily want students to be very, very successful in another place, but they want them to be daring the seemingly impossible and to jump over the threshold that they don't know what height this is, and to some extent succeed and come back. That's what employers want. Does not have anything to do with what students want. And this is a part of the dilemma. How can we address this? I think along the lines that you mentioned, we have some success in the moment where we connect the student mobility activities with our research interests and research activities. For instance, I have a sizable group, an institute that deals with infrastructure supplies in the tropics and the subtropics, water, mobility concepts, energy supply in suburban areas somewhere in Africa, in Vietnam, whatever. So they have master students that really go with their project to the places where the actual need is. And they attract students from there to come to Cologne to learn the concepts and even export the programs to those places. So if you start connecting the journeys that are taken with the content that is transported, it really gets wonderful. But this this is laborious. This is not achieved by just, financing 300 euro per month so you can spend your living and perhaps buy a train ticket. This is about strengthening collaboration, multi-dimensional.
So I totally agree that when the students came here from Minnesota, it was because of renewable energy.
Exactly.
There was a scientific week program, so they got the best lectures, they got to know the companies, and that was the reason also why they were interested to come. Of course, Norway is also attractive, but you have to have a scientific program behind it, so you need to prepare to receive them, and it's quite an effort, actually.
Well, it's
I really do agree, and we are really also working on strengthening that dimension, but I'm slightly in doubt whether we can achieve that for the bigger masters of students. It would also always be focused on some programs and some collaborations, measurable effect and so on. So I think we have to have different paths for different kinds of student mobility.
Yeah. Well, it's more or less time to round up, but just to end on a happy note, we were approached, Tale as head of department and myself as dean, we were approached by a student who had been on exchange in Germany. And in Germany, he had a lot of language courses on offer. He could learn various different languages without being, he was a social science student. So he said, well, why can't we do something similar? So what we've done so far is we've conducted a survey among all the bachelor students at the university to find out whether there's any interest in learning German in addition to the study program they're on. And the results were actually quite promising, so we have to see how we can follow that up. Because this is, as you say, many students have to choose very early, and very often they regret afterwards not having seized the opportunity to learn a foreign language. So this will be sort of a way of giving them a second chance.
Very nice.
So, yeah, we'll have to work on that. Yes, well, I'd like to thank you for this interesting talk, and I look forward to the rest of the program. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.